Hello and welcome to another My ASD marriage video. How did I find out that my husband is potentially on the spectrum? I say potentially because it's not an official diagnosis. So it begins with our son. I have a number of children. However, one son was different than the others in really interesting and unusual ways. Firstly, when he was born, he wouldn't sleep. He would sleep for like 45 minutes at a time and then spend huge amounts of time unsettled, restless, crying, and just unable to be soothed or relaxed or sleep or anything like that. I would spend 30 minutes, 45 minutes tapping him, rocking him, trying to get him to sleep, and he just wouldn't. The only way he slept or settled was lying beside me in bed, which made things awkward because I couldn't get anything done. But at the same time, it was really sweet, nice loving moments lying next to him. So I knew that he had unusual broken sleep patterns and just a sad, restless baby, but I just couldn't make sense of it. He observed things in different ways to his siblings, and I've never seen this before in other children. Tell me if you have. There was something on top of the fridge, and he was away from the fridge, and I could see this little baby looking at the thing on top of the fridge. It was a red car. And he crawled towards the fridge, gets to the base of the fridge and looks around and can't understand why he can't see the car anymore. So he goes back to where he was, spies the car, and then crawls in the direction that he thinks is going to get him to this car. And again, he's baffled. He couldn't understand, depth perception. And I imagine that a lot of babies don't understand depth perception. It's something that we learn. However, it was really interesting because I'd never seen a baby try to crawl towards something at a height like that before. I just thought that was really, really interesting. He hated being bathed. If I tried to get him in the water, he would react like it was hot lava. He would sort of like that cat clinging to the sides, he would cling to the sides, scream like I was murdering him, absolute hissy fit. You couldn't bath him. He was just that, I don't know if petrified is the word. He didn't seem afraid so much as just really didn't want to have a bath. And how we dealt with that was we put him in swimming lessons so that he could learn that water was fun. And that helped. Once he started getting in the pool and realizing you can jump in and play around and muck around and water's fun, then bath time was much easier, and then he would stay in it for ages and play. He started talking as usual, the same as my other children. He wasn't delayed in his speech. However, when he did start talking, his sentences were slow and broken up and well thought out. So he might say, for example, I went to bed and I could see the moon from my bed. And it would be, I went to bed and that would be how he told any kind of story that he was trying to tell. And it was like he was struggling to find the right words or struggling to find a word to put into the sentence. It was really interesting to watch. It would get a little bit frustrating because you'd kind of be standing there thinking, get to the point. But we just patiently waited, and eventually, he got to the end of the story. But that was an interesting thing that my other children didn't do. He tantrumed well into boyhood, well into primary school. The other children, they were probably finished tantruming by 4 or 5, whereas my Asperger's son, he just tantrumed all of the time, for a long time. And the smallest things would set him off. So if I asked him to do something, He'd hit the deck, arms and legs everywhere. And you never knew what was going to make him have the tantrum or why he was having the tantrum. But we would just let him go. We would just walk away and let him just work himself out. And after a while, 45 minutes or so, he'd just come up to you, happy as Larry, and all is well. And so I learned around that to put less pressure on him, because I noticed that certain things got certain responses. So if I asked him to do 3 things at once, can you do this, that and this, he would lose it. But if I asked him, can you do that? And then when that was all finished and he was relaxed, I'd say, can you do this other thing? He would go and do it. And then when he was relaxed, I'd ask him, can you do the 3rd thing? So I had workarounds to just ease him out of those sort of tantrum sessions. He didn't understand cause and effect. If he did something like a miss, like hit his brother, for example, and I punished him, he would be really confused. He would be like, why am I getting punished? I'm so confused, I don't understand it. And he would cry and sometimes tantrum, but a lot of the times just be distraught about, why am I getting punished? I don't want to be punished, you can't punish me, what's happening, yada yada yada. And I'd have to explain to him, well, this happened and then that happened, and then as a response, this is now happening. And so whenever I did, I guess, punish him by sending him to his room, for example, I would have to explain to him, you're going to your room because XYZ happened and this was the sequence and yada yada yada. Without that, he just didn't understand why there was a consequence happening. He was just so confused all the time. And there were a lot of consequences because he used physical force as opposed to words. If you had something that he wanted, he would just come up and snatch it off you. If he had something that you wanted and you went up to try and take it, and by you I mean other children, he would just grab them and like bend an arm back or a finger back, or he'd just do this vice grip on the body and things like this. So he was not very good at saying, I've got it first, I had it first, you only want it because I want it, or things like that. He would react first and then speak second. We had a situation where he had a kind of nemesis, a friend of his who was kind of bullyish, and this boy was always taking stuff off my son and always trying to push him around and just kind of be annoying, to be honest. And there was one time my son had something this kid was trying to take off him, so my son just grabs it like so, holding onto it for grim death, and this boy reaches across to grab it and my son just bit him. He was like, my hands are full, I can't get you, I'm not good at using my words, so he just bit him. And obviously the parent of that child was a bit upset. I can understand, but at the same time I'm thinking, well, what did you expect was going to happen? Your son keeps trying to take stuff off mine. But that was just how my son rolled. He wasn't good with words. Sometimes, when he was older, he would say, I told you not to do that. And I'd look at him and say, you actually didn't speak. And I said to him, you must have thought, don't do that. And then maybe thought you said it, but you didn't say it. And he'd kind of go, oh, like this. And that was again another sort of unusual little trait that he had. One thing that really spun me out, and my husband as well, was at the age of 4, he did a 500-piece jigsaw puzzle. It was an adult jigsaw puzzle. And he didn't do the easy parts, he did the sky. If you've ever done jigsaws, the sky is like the worst thing to do. And he was doing it by just looking at a shape, seeing that the shape and the colour fit and just putting it in. And he would rarely guess. It was really phenomenal to watch. He wasn't picking up a piece and going, well, let me try it here. He would go, dink, and there it was. And I was watching him do this jigsaw, just amazed. And he's 4 years old. So I realised then that he had really good spatial awareness. He understood shapes, he understood colour. It was just amazing. And again, I have numerous children and none of them were ever able to do a 500-piece jigsaw at the age of 4. And he did that jigsaw, pulled it apart, did it again, pulled it apart, did it again. He was just really, really clever. At one point in time, I did think, oh, I've got a genius on my hands. But yeah, I just knew that he was different in some way, but just didn't know what. By year 8, his teachers had called me into the school to ask me if I would get him tested with regards to how he learned. And I thought they meant like, does he learn by listening? Does he learn by seeing? Does he learn by writing or reading? And I thought maybe it had to do with IQ. Typical arrogant parent. Anyway, I say yes, get the tests done. And then I'm called in to speak to one of the psychologists. And as we're talking, I'm realizing this has nothing to do with him learning or his IQ. This is something wholly different. And I realized as we were speaking that my son had a condition. I could just tell by what the person was saying. And the questions he was asking and his responses to my responses. And I realized there's something going on. And at the end of it, that specialist says to me, we're going to send him for one more test, and that is with a pediatrician who specialises in diagnosing children on the spectrum. And I was like, what? Wow. And at this point in time, I'd never heard of the term Asperger's. I'd never heard of high functioning, high executive functioning, low needs. I had heard none of that. All I knew was the term autism, and all I'd ever seen from autism was people on TV who were sitting on the floor rocking or banging their heads or not talking or being shown little smiley faces and frowny faces and being taught to communicate in that way. So I was absolutely confused. I remember thinking, how can my son be autistic? That's just strange to me. I'm so, like that was not where I thought these tests were going. Anyway, he gets the tests and sure enough, he is on the spectrum. And they explained that he's high functioning, and that is that he doesn't have a whole lot of special needs. And for the most part, I guess, by looking at him, you can't tell he's got a disability. But in point of fact, he has a disability, so that's how we found out. And then, of course, that person asks me a whole bunch of questions, then asks me a whole bunch of questions about my husband who wasn't present, and then said, it sounds like your husband most likely is on the spectrum as well. And so that's how it came about. And I remember thinking, that's even more crazy that my husband is on the spectrum. But I went home, researched it, and was like, oh. And everything was a light bulb moment. It all made sense. As we left that meeting, the child psychologist, pediatrician, autism spectrum disorder specialist lady asked me if I needed help or referrals and such with regards to dealing with my son. And I said, I don't understand what you mean, dealing with him, how? And she said something about difficulties. And I said to her, I haven't found my son difficult. I said to her, I just have adapted all of my parenting, routines and such to suit whatever specific reactions and such that he gave. And so I had just been adapting all this time, because by now he's a teenager. I had just been adapting all of my parenting skills and parenting styles to suit what worked. So without even knowing that he had any kind of special condition, I had just been working these roundabouts with him, and they had worked. Growing up, he hadn't been particularly kind to his younger siblings. He was rough and intolerant of them. He would often lash out and attack physically and things like this. And so how I dealt with that was I followed him everywhere. I followed the siblings everywhere. I stayed home. That was the main reason I stayed home, was because I watched him with his siblings and realised he can't be left alone with them. And not in a bad way. He's not psychopathic. He's just not good with using his words, and he's far more likely to be physical. And so I would just kind of be there with them, playing with them, teaching them how's a good way to interact with each other, how's not a good way to interact with each other, keeping them occupied and educated and just doing my thing, kind of like homeschooling, but in a different sense. And so I had adapted my parenting just to suit that particular situation. It was hard watching the younger sibling struggle, because the younger sibling wanted to be friends with his brother and his brother just wasn't interested. And so this poor sibling, he ended up with the same kind of Cassandra syndrome as I did. He was really depressed and really lonely, and he thought that his brother hated him. He became scared of his brother to a degree and avoided him, and he was just depressed all the time. One time he came up to me and he was chatting to me, and I could just see that he was just really, really down. And I was just like, oh, he's in the same boat as I am, with this husband who's kind of like neglectful of my emotions, and here's this child of mine whose sibling is neglectful of his emotions. The saving grace was, of course, other siblings. But once he found out his brother was on the spectrum and I showed him a quick video on what that means, again, like me, he just calmed down. He just realised, I suppose, that it wasn't about him. He realised that whatever was going on with his brother, just as I realised what was going on with my husband, had to do with them and not to do with us. And it's easier then to just not take it personally. And at first I didn't know how to tell my son that he was on the spectrum, because I didn't want him to feel labelled. And I didn't know what to do, as a matter of fact. I thought, do I tell him? And now he's got this thing hanging over him, and, you know, this sort of label and a disability and that sort of thing. But then at the same time, I don't want him to not know, because he can learn things about himself if he knows about it and stuff like this. So it did take me a little while to sort of build up the gumption to tell him. And when I told him, he was cross that I didn't tell him straight away. But then he also said to me, I don't want to hear about it. I don't want you to talk about that at all. I'm not interested. And I think that's just because it's a stigma for him. And I don't think he really wants to concentrate on that. I'm not sure if he'll research as he gets older and find out what it entails and adaptations and things that he can implement in his life to have workarounds and things, or if he'll follow in his dad's footsteps and bury his head in the sand. I don't know. But I do chat to him regardless of him saying he doesn't want me to, because I'll tell him the good things about it as well, so that he doesn't feel like it's a, you know, kind of a death sentence or something like that, something really dark. So I'll talk to him about the qualities. So, for example, we were sitting around, I can't remember the situation, and he was saying something about what's good about it. I can't think of anything that's good about it. And I said to him, well, I said, take your dad for example. I said, he's really good with numbers. I said, watch this. And so my son's sitting next to me. I get my calculator out because I'm terrible at maths. And I give my my husband, some obscure maths thing, like 97 times 6,037. What's the answer? And I type it into my calculator and I show it to my son, and my husband's over there standing up going, and then gives the answer. And he gives the answer that's on the calculator, and my son was like, oh my God, wow. And I said to him, there are blessings to being on the spectrum. There are certain skills that you will have that others just don't have. And that impressed him, I think, made him feel a little bit better about his condition. because I don't want him or my husband to feel like they're less than because they have this kind of disability, not any more than if they were blind or they couldn't walk or anything like this. You can't help how you're born. And I've taught my children that right from the get-go. You never hate on somebody for something they cannot change about themselves. That's just ridiculously unfair. You can help people work on things that they can change, like personality disorders, but you don't hate on them for things they can't change. Anyway, that's how the diagnosis came along. Let me know if you can relate. How did you find out about it? Has your partner been officially diagnosed? Comment below, love to hear from you. And thank you so much for taking the time to watch my video.